Hello, my name is Esteban, and I'd like to start off my speech with a statement. So, as soon as 2040, the world could be suffering from worsening food shortages, wildfires, and a mass die-off of the coral reefs, which are, and that was according to an article published from the New York Times on October 7th from Coral David Report. So you might be wondering, what could be causing all of this? This is pretty shocking, and it's really close. It's like almost, it's like about 18 years away. So this is all due to climate change, and today I will be informing you about the topic of climate change. So knowing what climate change is important for us as a society to know, because it's very important to preserve our life and to preserve our life for our future kids and grandkids. To understand what climate change is, I will be discussing what climate change is, the history of climate change, and the effects climate change can cause for the future. So that leads into my first point. What is climate change? The definition of climate change has been developed over years by scientists and people who study the environment. According to globalchange.gov, US Global Change Research Program, climate change is the change in average weather conditions that persist over multiple decades or longer. It also includes looking at aspects of the environment for climate change. Factors in climate change include the increase and decrease in temperatures, the changes in precipitation, changing risk of certain types of severe weather events, and other changes in climate, also according to globalchange.gov. So the history of climate change. Climate change was not really a thing back then, before like the Industrial Revolution. Basically before the revolution, climate change was not discussed among the people. Science also back then was not very advanced and was not very reliable, since most people believed in like religion for their science. So people had no way of like knowing what climate change was. It wasn't until that during the revolution, the Industrial Revolution, that people made speculations about climate and using science and techniques. According to an article from history.com published October 6, 2017, a French mathematician named Joseph Fourier in the 1820s proposed the idea of the greenhouse gas effect, describing that the Earth's atmosphere acts as a sort of like a glass greenhouse with energy entering through the glass and being trapped inside. Much like a warm greenhouse. In the 1860s, an Irish scientist named John Tyndall, in his tests, showed that coal gas, which contains CO2 and other greenhouse gases, was especially effective at absorbing energy. He went on to demonstrate how effective CO2 was at absorbing sunlight, kind of like a sponge, and that's also from history.com. Fast forward to the 1900s, the idea of climate change started to gain some traction. According to history.com, the history.com article, by the 1930s, Guy Stewart, who was already claiming that Guy Stewart calendar was already claiming that carbon emissions were already warming the Earth. Calendar's calculations suggested that the doubling of CO2 could warm the Earth by 2 degrees Celsius. In the 1960s, the Newton curve was created by geochemist Charles Newton, and it was a way of tracking the CO2 levels of the Earth and predicting future CO2 levels. Fast forward again to the present, where climate change is already being seen in full effect. According to an article published January 18, 2017 from NASA.gov, 2016 was the warmest year on record. The globally average temperatures in 2016 were 1.78 degrees Fahrenheit, or 0.99 degrees Celsius, warmer than the mid-20th century. And at that time, it was the third consecutive year in a row to set a new record for high temperatures. According to an article from Vox, published December 12, 2017 from Umair Irfan, 2017 was the second worst year for wildfires, the first being 2015, with 58,000 wildfires burning across America, burning over 9 million acres of land. All of this was amplified because of climate change and the increasing warmth of the earth. And another Vox article published November 30th, 2017 by Brian Resnick. The 2017 hurricane season was intensified by warmer than average water temperatures from the Atlantic Ocean, stated by Philip Klotzbach, a hurricane expert from Colorado State University. 2017 was our 7th highest accumulated cyclone energy in the Atlantic Ocean. And you might be thinking, wow, that's crazy. How could this happen, you know? Like, what do you think? That leads on to my next point, effects of climate change for the future. And that already seems pretty dim for us because the outlook for the future doesn't seem so good for us. According to the article from The Guardian, published October 8th, we only have 12 years left to limit the destruction that would be caused by climate change. By 2030, global will reach 1.5 degrees Celsius and will cause major catastrophes such as drought, floods, extreme heat, and poverty for hundreds of millions of people. By 2100, the sea level will rise, affecting over 10 million more people, bringing an additional 10 centimeters of additional pressure on the coastlines. And also the coral reefs will die off by 2100. At least 99% will die off because of warming temperatures in the seas. Insects and plants are also twice as likely to die off in 2100 if we reach an increase of 2 degrees Celsius, which would be disastrous because these insects help our crops by fighting off pests and fighting off disease. And plants also help because they're the ones who absorb our CO2 and prevent the earth from warming up. So if these die off, then we're kind of in a big problem. There is a way to prevent all of this, but it seems kind of unlikely to happen. According to the IPCC report on climate change published October 8, 2018, to prevent the 1.5 degrees Celsius increase by 2030, it would require a rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented change in all aspects of society. CO2 emissions would need to be reduced by 45% from the 2010 levels by 2030, and it needs to reach net zero by 2050. It would also require a rapid and far-reaching transitions in land, our energy, industry, buildings, and transportation, and cities. Keeping in line with the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement would also help, but since the US left that agreement, that will make it harder for us to prevent from going over 1.5 degrees Celsius and even going over 2 degrees Celsius by 21. So that seems pretty devastating for all of us, but who knows? And today, so in conclusion, I have discussed with you what climate change is, the history of climate change, and how climate will affect us in the future. So I hope you all learned something new from me and how climate change is affecting our world. And with that, I would like to leave you off with something to remember. Climate change is very real and it's already affecting us. I encourage you to do your part in helping to combat it now. So now that you have this newfound knowledge about it, do your part to save the world.